Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today, getting into some league winners for the second half of the fantasy football season. No, it might seem a little early, but we're already 7 weeks through the year, and this would be the halfway point for a lot of you in the regular season. So I want to get to some players that can help you if you're struggling, maybe get back into the race. If you're crushing it so far, help you finish the season out strong. I've got 4 players, 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers. I know for a lot of you guys, if you guys are regulars to the channel, expecting to see a must-add video today, look, the waiver wire is just a depleted dead zone. There's not really a lot of stuff to talk about from the waiver wire or players to add. I'll maybe touch on it in our YouTube Shorts channel if there's anyone you're desperate for. But I think from what we've talked about the last couple of weeks, you probably know what to do. So I'm going to get to 4 of these players here. If you guys enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit that like button. Would really appreciate if you did subscribe to the channel as well if you are new. And let's get to these players. We're going to start with a pair of running backs. Our first one here is Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. What I'll be looking at for the majority of this video is actually taking the stats and numbers that we've accumulated through the first 7 weeks of the year, look at how these defenses are performing against running backs or against the run, and I'm going to use that to my advantage when I'm looking at the rest of the season. So we'll be sharing some of the schedules for these teams the rest of the year because it can be very, very valuable. But first, with Stevenson, continues to see that split with Ezekiel Elliott. Elliott had the rushing advantage this past week as well. So that's back-to-back weeks now that Zeke has had the advantage in terms of total carries. But Stevenson has been more efficient with his opportunities, not by a crazy amount. This is a brutal offensive line that's really struggled to run block for these guys, but it still has been better, which is a good sign for Stevenson to potentially take over more of that role. But what we do know is Stevenson is the primary receiving back here. Stevenson held a 39-21 edge in total snaps, so he is on the field more often, far more often. But Zeke did take both of the inside the 5 carries that the team had this past week against Buffalo and held a 6-3 advantage on red zone carries as well. So it's still a split, but I think Stevenson has the best chance of taking away from this split. Now, if you're going to take away from this video that you should be acquiring Ezekiel Elliott, maybe that's worth a sleeper for you or worth a shot on as a really inexpensive candidate. But let me get into the schedule, and I think that's really, really important here. So becomes very good for them rest of season. As you can see, 3 of their first 7 games this year were against top 10 run defenses and teams that were top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running back. So it was really tough for them. And now they only have 1 game left the rest of the year against one of those top 10 defenses, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs. But as you can see, green represents matchups against bottom 10 defenses to running backs. Yellow is obviously a fairly neutral matchup, and then red will be those difficult matchups. 5 of their final 9 games this season are going to be against teams that are bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs, and 7 of their last 9 opponents of the year are below the league average in fantasy defense to running back. So I really like that, especially when you look at some of these specific matchups too. Los Angeles, Denver, and Buffalo have all been pretty bad to receiving backs as well, giving up a lot of receptions and receiving yards, which is exactly what Stevenson does well. So really important to look at matchups, and for Stevenson in particular, the matchups are great. I think his role is pretty solid when it comes to your half PPR and full PPR formats. Coming off a pretty solid week, but I still think he's someone you can get on the fairly cheap and could perform, especially when you look at these matchups to close out the year. Like Buffalo's 22nd, I believe. They're barely outside the bottom 10. So really, like, the majority of these matchups are going to be against bottom defenses, or 6. That would be 6 of the 9 that are bottom 11. So very good here. Going off of fantasy matchups for running backs is, I think, pretty key because honestly, at the running back position, you can play a lot of replacement level players, and if they have plus matchups, they're going to perform. We've seen it. You saw it as recently as this past week. So love Stevenson as a guy to buy low on. Our next running back, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. Now, this is kind of a play on both Ford and Kareem Hunt. Not a trade you need to make right this second today when you're watching this video, but maybe later this week when we get a little bit more information, because we did see Ford go down with an ankle injury and left the game in a walking boot, from what I understand. So his status for next week is going to be up in the air and could be, for the next little bit if we see him hit injured reserve. Kareem Hunt is absolutely the player I want to buy, and we'll get into a bit more why. But first off, the run game has become a lot more of a focal point for this offense. We saw this past week after some really brutal matchups. They went Titans, Ravens, 49ers the last 3 weeks prior. Those are three of the toughest teams to run the football against, and it kind of proved out to be that way. Ford found the end zone a couple of times, but that was from pass catching. So we saw against Indy, they ran the ball 32 times in that game. So definitely leaning more on the ground game. And what I think is important as well is Watson's injury, this lingering injury with his rotator cuff. He obviously left the game. PJ Walker came in. Whether it's Watson or it's Walker, I do think the ground game is going to give them the best chance to, of course, take care of the ball and move the ball effectively. And of course, with this defense playing the way it is, I think this team will want to take care of the football. The best way to do that is by running it and ride this defense to a potential playoff berth this year. So the schedule, that's what we got to get into again here, which I really, really like. It's one of the best in the NFL for fantasy running backs. They have just one matchup in their final 10 games against top 10 defenses against running backs. That is the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 14. But half of their matchups, as you can see, again in green, are against bottom 10 teams against fantasy running backs. And you look at these games in particular, and we're seeing Chicago in week 15 and Houston in week 17. Those are your fantasy quarterfinals and fantasy semifinals. So this is an investment to make in the long term as well. But you look at Arizona, you look at Pittsburgh, you look at Denver, those are juicy. Like Arizona and Denver, I think are 32nd and maybe 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Those are some really solid matchups. So definitely like what we see here rest of season for this team and their ground attack and how much more efficient they can be than they've been the last few weeks. And the Browns are already running the ball quite a bit. They're running the ball at the 7th highest rate in the NFL, and actually their 33 rush attempts per game is second. So if this is Kareem Hunt's backfield to himself, I definitely want to make him my target here. But if Ford is going to be okay, only going to miss a short period, I think from what Stefanski has said and what they've done, Ford is the guy they believe gives them the best chance to win and be the most efficient guy for this backfield. So I would lean his way. But again, pay attention to the injury news. But at the very least, right now, you could buy Kareem Hunt and honestly, both of these guys quite cheap because you haven't seen massive fantasy for performances. Obviously, we saw Hunt find the end zone twice this past week, but still, these are players that other league mates you have aren't going to think too highly of and could probably let go of for a reasonable amount when this is one of the best schedules rest of season. Now we move to the wide receiver position for one of the ultimate buy lows. I think this is a guy that we're going to take a chance on, and if we're wrong, I don't think it's going to kill us, but if we're right, I think this could be a significant difference maker rest of season for you. And that's Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. Watson obviously has been dealing with with his injury. He finally came off the injury report heading into this week, which I think is a great sign for you. And as well, like I mentioned about, this is someone to buy low on, the lack of production. He hasn't really done much. He has a touchdown. He does have like a 3-catch, 90-yard game a couple weeks ago. And then this week, he kind of was a complete dud. So great buy low opportunity for Watson. And I think what some of the underlying numbers indicate is the usage and the way that they're utilizing him compared to last season is still very similar. 25% of Watson's targets this year have been on passes of 20 plus air yards. Last season was right around 27%. So he's still getting that deep ball volume that can help him create explosive plays and give you those league winning or week winning type performances. And he's still getting targets. He's still generating opportunities for himself. 23.9% target share is still definitely what we want to see, and I think he can definitely increase on it as he gets healthier, which of course we haven't quite seen completely yet. And I do think this is a Packers offense that is going to need to lean on their passing game quite a bit. Take a look at this schedule here. You're seeing 6 of the final 10 games are against teams that are bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Minnesota, 27th. Pittsburgh, 28th. Los Angeles, we see that one in week 11. They're dead last in fantasy points allowed to receivers. The Giants, Tampa Bay is 26th, and then backed as well with Minnesota in there that is 27th. So we've got great matchups here. We only have 2 of their final 10 opponents they have are top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Los Angeles, the Rams, and then we have Kansas City. I think both Kansas City and the Rams are a little bit inflated in their pass defense. I don't think they're necessarily elite pass defenses in the league, but right now the fantasy production does say that. What I think is even more important is you look at these games and you also see teams that are very good against the run. Minnesota, Tampa, Kansas City, and Detroit. And even as well with who was the other here? Pittsburgh hasn't been terrible. I think these are also teams that they're going to be very tough to be able to run the football against. So that means the passing volume could see an even higher number. I think Watson as a healthy member of this offense, will be the number one option. And we've seen him be able to generate explosive plays and also be that reliable end zone target and red zone target for this team to be able to generate touchdowns. So I think Watson is someone you can get incredibly cheap right now, especially in more of those casual leagues where people don't really pay attention to some of these advanced numbers or kind of know where Watson stands on the depth chart. This is the number one guy. He just hasn't quite played like it yet. But if this schedule tells me anything, I think he can play like that player, especially for your fantasy team, and be that league-winning type of player for the rest of the season. And finally, a wide receiver that's a little bit more expensive, but I think is absolutely going to be worth every penny, and I still think is undervalued, is Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers. He's the wide receiver 25 in fantasy points on the season. But have we ever seen a guy, I think, be as dominant and proven wide receiver one that's flying more under the radar? He's the wide receiver 15 in fantasy points per game right now, but you look at some of these numbers in such a competitive offense with George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, and I'm shocked more people aren't in on this guy. He's got an almost 32% target share this season, which is 6th at the wide receiver position. He has 581 air yards, which is 10th at the position. He's got an ADOT of 15.1 yards, which is 10th as well. He's seen a lot of those downfield opportunities for this offense and creating off of them as well. He doesn't have a lot of passes of 20-plus air yards, which I was shocked, but in those 10 to 20, that 10 to 20 area, nobody has been better than Brandon Aiyuk. His 3.66 yards per route run only trails one man, Tyreek Hill. Like, he is at this elite level. Like, people are overlooking the fact that this is an elite fantasy wide receiver who's getting all of these elite opportunities and giving elite production, but nobody thinks of him on that level, and this is why we can take advantage. And not only am I combining that, this is the best fantasy schedule for wide receivers in all of fantasy football to finish the season. He has 9 games remaining, just one of them. Only one matchup is against a top 10 fantasy defense to the position. That is Baltimore in week 16. 7 of them, this is just green. 7 of these matchups are against bottom 10 fantasy defenses to wide receivers. And in more specific, because I think we all know how good this 49ers offense is, they can basically move the ball however they want to. But Jacksonville, Tampa, Seattle, and Philly, those are 4 teams that are here on this list because they're very, very good against the run. So teams are having to throw the ball against them quite a bit and having to rely on the pass game to find success with their offense. And this 49ers team is one of the most run-heavy teams in the league. They're running the ball on 53.1% of plays. And even when they get into the red zone, they're running the ball at the same rate. So there's a ton of rushing volume. They lead the NFL in rushing rate this season. But in these particular matchups that we're seeing on the rest of season schedule, they're going to need to throw the ball more because Jacksonville, Tampa, Seattle, Philly, these are legitimate run defense. These are very good teams that have proven it, not just this season, but for Tampa Bay and Philadelphia, or for Tampa Bay in specific, the years past, and Philadelphia has really bumped things up throughout this in the offseason and into this season. And then Jacksonville was a solid run defense as well last year. So I really think they'll need to lean on the passing game a lot more to close out the year, which is a great sign because they've already given Aiyuk elite fantasy production in the lowest volume passing offense in the NFL. So imagine what we're going to get here if this team starts throwing the ball on like a 5% increase, 5 to 6% increase compared to what they have so far this season. And Aiyuk, like I mentioned, is getting those downfield opportunities. His target share is great. And then he's not dominating the red zone area. He's splitting those opportunities. Like the red zone targets, I think he trails Deebo Samuel by 1. End zone targets, he trails George Kittle by 1 for the lead. So he's still getting all of these opportunities, some of them at a really elite level, and at the very least, he's getting the split on that red zone area and touchdown opportunities and really converting those opportunities at a high level too. So love Aiyuk, definitely a player I would still buy high on. I know I'm recording this video before the Monday night game. Maybe if he has a down week, you can definitely jump in and enjoy a great finish to the season for Aiyuk. Those are my 4 fantasy football league winners for the second half. Would love to hear what you guys think about these players and as well any other players you might be curious about rest of season. I'm going to post these schedules for both the running back and wide receiver position to my Twitter. You can follow me there. It's just at Tyler McKillop, my full name. So drop me a follow there if you want to check out this full schedule and how these teams match up. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you are new, and we will see you on the next one.